Hi, Swati. Thank you for joining me on the Carbon Exposure Project. It's an absolute pleasure to have you here today. Cheers.
Cheers. Thank you for having me.
Oh,
I'm very excited to be
pleasure.
here today.
So maybe, can I start kind of all the way back? Because, so we caught up obviously about a month ago. And as you see, I'm super enthusiastic. I would love to hear your perspective, right? But I'm going to set the scene for the audience. I met you, correct me if I'm wrong here, but around 2018.
That's
And it was at a sustainability networking event in Singapore, and it was predominantly students, right? And in I walk, the guy in a suit, and I was like, uh-oh, I'm the odd duck out. And then we struck up a conversation that left an indelible imprint on me, and I thought, wow. And then when I walked away, I said to myself, this lady has got big things ahead of her. And then I see you, 5 years later at a conference, and I was like, oh my God, do you remember me? And then we reconnected. And obviously I've been following your like meteoric rise of the last few years, like as a fanboy via LinkedIn. So again, it's a pleasure to have you. You've done some pretty amazing things in relatively short period of time. I wanted to invite you on this platform really to learn from you and to get your perspective, because I think you're an amazing person and an inspiration to other young people. And that energy we need in not only in the carbon market, but in sustainability broadly. I think I might have shared this with you, but one of my ambitions on this platform was not only to provide it as a platform for this discourse and dialogue amongst people that are experts, but if I could motivate one young person to enter in this market, I've done my job. Right? And so that's the kind of context. Your background is fascinating. I'd love to dive into that if you'll indulge me. So you're currently WWF, but you started out as a member of the Singapore Youth Climate Coalition, and you effectively worked in terms of advocacy work at various COPs. And correct me if I'm wrong here, but you went to Katowice as your first COP in 18, and then you've been to a bunch of other COPs since. That's my intro to you. Can you give me your perspective, really, from that climate advocacy perspective and the voice and the perspective that's really missing oftentimes in dialogue, which is the perspective of the youth?
Well, let me start by saying I think the first time we met was I was a master's student desperately trying to understand how sustainability actually works in the market. And so that conversation really, really helped me.
Great.
And I think we, as just to do a shout out to all the sustainability professionals in Singapore. They have been one of the most open audiences to listen to young people, to encourage young voices. And I think that's kind of snowballed into what it is today, where, there's a whole new generation of young green professionals.
It's so encouraging.
Who are critical and, inspirational. They are nervous, they're anxious, they're excited. And this is like this sort of bubbling energy. So I'm happy to say that, I witnessed the start of it, and now it's grown into something monumental. So that's always amazing to be part of.
Yeah, that's a great point, because that was part of the amazing energy that brought me back to this beautiful country. Right? The Singapore experience is this incredible social experiment, but the government and all of the auxiliary, let's say, parts of this ecosystem are so supportive of not only establishing Singapore as a carbon trading hub and a commodities hub, but as a sustainability destination. And the open-mindedness and the pragmatism is a brilliant place. And it's so encouraging for young people.
And I mean, I'll say I moved to Singapore back in 2016 and this is a time where Paris Agreement was just signed, and nobody had an NDC. Singapore didn't have a goal, and they were in the process of developing it. You had this like vague sort of sustainability term included. We still have MUR, we still had it, which is Ministry of Energy and Water. In the course of 7 years that I've been in Singapore, that has evolved into Ministry of Sustainability and Environment. That alone is a testament to how much it has changed. And then you see, an NDC has come, which is the nationally determined contribution of how Singapore wants to voluntarily reduce their emissions. And then you have an enhancement of that's already announced. You have this whole focus on carbon markets as a growth strategy. You have green jobs as like this accelerating sort of area that Singapore government's investing in. You have private sector that, when I joined WWF in 2021, we had 9 companies who had SBTI, and today we have 41, and that's over a course of two and a half years. So,
and it's only going to continue.
And it's
it feels
accelerating.
Like it's just, and it's just literally just taking off. It's fascinating.
So I think that threshold is crossed where you still have to push people to say climate change is relevant. And I think that witnessing that change as a young person in a country has been just, I don't think you can mimic that. And it's
pretty special.
It's very special. And it's able to sort of tap into the psyche of people as they change. And being a student, so I came here for National University of Singapore to do my master's, and to see fundamental shift in organizations, the way they do their sustainability report, the quantification, moving away from qualitative statements like we love Mother Nature to saying 20% reduction from scope 1 and 2 by 2030.
The nitty-gritty. I mean, it's great.
It's beautiful. It's a beautiful thing.
Yeah.
Yeah. So I think that's been that's probably been a very strong part of it.
Yeah.
For me, for the climate change part and for how I got involved in youth advocacy work, that actually comes from, ironically, being in the private sector and feeling not fully satisfied about the impact I was having on the society at large. Well, it's a big hat to wear, but I think
it's a key component of engagement, and I think that's stakeholder engagement that I think business owners and leaders understand full well. We need, and I'm talking about the collective we here, right, as one of the older kind of guys in this space, but leaders identify that, and certainly my clients have expressed this to me, whether they're sustainability managers or CEOs or whomever, where they say we need to engage with the next generation, whether it's millennials, Gen Z, whatever it is, but essentially we need to harness that energy, and we need to encourage people to want to, want to work for us. And if they don't have that consistent fountain of youth, and they lack energy, and essentially people are an integral component of businesses.
And I mean, there's dreamers and there are realists, and young people tend to be dreamers more, and you need that. You need somebody to be able to
rational optimists.
Exactly, and cautious optimists. Nobody's coming to the playground saying everything's been sorted, but there is this kind of energy that we still have a long way to go, but we can do it with the right with the right operations policies put into place.
Yeah, completely.
And I think there is inspiration in that, and there is no way that we can achieve it without that sound saying this is our future that you're dictating with your decision. And if you don't have that voice, you kind of lose touch with reality, where you talk about economics and GDP and you get lost in the idea.
And then the nuance, and it's kind of like whatever.
Exactly.
Yeah.
Of that the future is still ahead of you, and there's other actors who are going to be affected by that future that you are dictating with your decisions.
I completely agree about that. And that's why I'm so passionate about mentoring, and so so open to working and engaging, and ultimately plugging in. It's a very selfish thing, plugging into the energy that young people bring. And I look at my team, and they're all in their early to mid 20s, and I thrive off that energy. And it's to that point that you just mentioned. We are custodians throughout our lives of our problem solving, like whatever the agenda is, right? For us, we've chosen climate work, and for me, it's markets.
Right.
And I'm not going to be around in 2050 when these objectives actually have a mandate to be achievable.
Yeah.
You will be, and people your generation will be. So we have to pass and hand the baton over, right? Like I've got 10 more years where I can go at a sprint, and after that, I'm going to run out of energy. I'm 45, right? So that's just being realistic. We need to harness the power of young people. That's absolutely paramount.
And I've also seen this very interesting trend, which I hope sort of, again, keeps accelerating, is that I think in the past, youth involvement was sort of was more tokenism than it was genuine involvement. And so I see certain institutions, I do think UN is definitely one of those organizations that took it quite seriously, and certain presidencies within that did. And so when I was at COP, for example, in Glasgow specifically, we had a whole manifesto on Article 6, which we can talk about as well, but on saying what youth wanted out of Article 6. And there were some key principles we were particularly passionate about. And we had meetings with negotiators, we had meetings with, business leaders, specifically like coalition leaders, with the hope that we are actually heard. That's all. That's all you can do, right? You're not a government, you're not democratically elected, but you are a strong stakeholder in today's market. And
in society. That civil society piece is so essential.
Yeah.
Absolutely agree. can I interject and give you some context from the old guys in the room, essentially, perspective? Around that time, just prior to Glasgow, was a fascinating time to see, because essentially the evangelists, the folks that have been around like forever, like me, we had this idea back in 08, 09, right? And you can kind of keep going and bashing that same, or beating that drum effectively. But I saw this perfect kind of confluence occur where you had investors putting pressure on, like downward pressure, and then the civil society, the Greta Thunberg kind of effect, I labeled it, right? Of the voice that was being heard of young people. And it just met right in the middle, and it created pressure, and it created action, and it created ambition. So I was buoyed by that. I thought that that was an absolutely brilliant moment. My hope is that it doesn't dissipate.
And I mean, you would think that. So actually, speaking of 2009 and that era, right? This is when the infamous Copenhagen climate change conference happened, where it basically was the biggest failure that was ever done, because nobody agreed.
It was an anticlimax. I won't call it a failure, but it was definitely anticlimactic. We all had so much hope.
Potato.
Exactly.
But what is interesting, and they say, the speculation is that because the global north and the global south had this like sort of deep divide.
Oh, completely.
And
they were opposed, essentially. Hey, this is a legacy.
There was no sort of leeway. There's no give and take. And I think since then, and one of the people I personally revere a lot is Christina Figueres, who's really called the constructor of the Paris Agreement. And she's a very stubborn optimist in her own words. But this kind of idea that, you know what, we all have something to gain and lose, and sort of having that collective recognition, which is what Paris Agreement led to.
Yes.
And if you see the tenet of Paris Agreement, party stakeholders, which are governments, are obviously the key sort of signatories, but you have non-party stakeholders for the first time that got integrated into this. And so you have civil societies, you have youth NGOs, you have business NGOs, voices that were actual formal representation in the COP process. That happened after Paris Agreement, and that happened in essence to any effect after the Paris Agreement.
Completely agree.
And so I think you're right.
And that was that inversion of the paradigm, effectively making that bottom-up approach, and ultimately determined by the countries, the NDCs, right?
Exactly.
So it wasn't prescriptive; it was open for adaptation. It's brilliant.
Yeah.
Love that. That's great. Thanks for that. Cheers. I'm going to cheers to that.
Cheers.